Cheers, everyone. It's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. I'm here in my backyard. The sun's going to set in 30 or 40 minutes, and I thought I would share with you my 10 comics brand new comics for this past Wednesday that I read this week, and do my usual ranking them from 10 down to 1 in order of my own personal enjoyment of them at the time that I read them. Super subjective, as always. So it was one of those weeks that was kind of a decent week. Excuse me, there weren't any comics I didn't enjoy. I'm burping a lot. A decent week, and but also not a week where any fireworks went off for me with the comics, with maybe my number one visually did. It's almost like I'm spoiled, and so I expect there to be like one or two comics that just like go, God, I love comics when I read them. But so it goes. And also, I tend to think when I've gotten 10 comics or more that there's going to be some masterpiece in there. But again, that's not really fair. Anyway, in at number 10 for me was Origins, which is the final issue of this series. Issue number 6. And it wrapped up okay. I think I loved the first 4 issues of this, and it just got less impactful for me. So I have no super complaints, but I neither was I kind of by the ending they crafted. And I think to a certain degree I thought by the end of the comic I would understand a little bit more about what had happened to humanity and everything. I mean, I think the clues are all there, but I wanted it spelled out a little more. That's me. I'm always wanting a super simple literal thing. I love the coloring in this book. I'm not sure where I'd rank this coloring wise, but be near the top of the pile, and the art's quite good too. And I'm assuming this is something that someone wanted to do as some IP, as some property, just because it's created by 3 people, you can see on the credits, who are not the writer or artist. So it's kind of like the writer and artist and the colorist and everything are hired hands for these 3 creators, and they hold the copyright. These people don't. I don't really know what that means, but I sort of assume it's like some let's develop our IP, and while we're at it, we'll publish it at Boom Comics. But I could be wrong. But overall, I'm glad I read this. Maybe in the end more for the art than the story. In at number 9 is the new Beasts of Burden. I wasn't really expecting to get this. The Beasts of Burden series just appears every now and then, and I got 2 of the minis in the past, and my comic shop just assumed to order it for me again. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have ordered it if it weren't for me. I'm undecided whether to tell them that I want to drop it, though. It's got really great art, especially the drawings of animals by artist Benjamin Dewey, whose work I loved on that image comic he did with Kurt Busiek, and they never finished it. What was that called? Like the Autumn Lands. And this feels less good than the Autumn Lands, but still great art, and most of the talent goes into the drawing of the talking dogs and other animals. And it's I don't even know, because I haven't read the earliest Beast of Burdens comics, but it's basically a group of magical dogs with the help of 1 or 2 humans who battle dark Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft-like evil. I'm kind of lumped in now with what I call the BPRD books that are like BPRD about a group of magical people with some kind of long-term battle against magical forces that threaten Earth. Like, for instance, American Vampire felt that way. And there was something else I read recently that felt that way. But the problem with this is I think it's in the writing, not the art. Although it doesn't help that the color scheme of the art has kind of a dull gray and brown feel, even though that might, in some senses, be a good choice for this World War II story. But it just feels very flat. There's something very flat, and I think it's in the writing. And I noticed this to a degree in the other Beasts of Burden books I read, and this seems even more noticeable to me in this first issue. Say the final page, and I'm going to show it. So look away if you were playing to read this and didn't want to see it. Not that you know what's going on, but it's a real grabber and makes me want to read more, to tell you the truth. So we'll see. It takes place in World War II, as I said, or just after World War II in occupied Japan, I think. Yeah. So, I don't know. Probably I'll drop it. In at number 8 was Dreaming the Waking Hours. I'm still enjoying this, but I feel less connected than I did in the first arc. I think I've lost track of the characters somewhat. I mean, I know who they are, rough outline, but I really felt more connected to the main character in the first arc, and I don't think it's the same woman here. Something in the kind of interlude between arcs just kind of threw me off, and I've never quite gotten back into it. But great art and coloring, and still a fun kind of in the universe of Sandman book. I'm definitely not dropping it. It's just, and as I said, all the comics I read this week I enjoyed, but it's just a little less, grabbing me a little less than some other books. And then I picked up the Cimmerian, Iron Shadows in the Moon, which I don't think is really the name of the original story. The original story is called Shadows in Moonlight, so I'm not sure why they call it Iron Shadows in the Moon. But this is the European adaptation of the Conan stories, and for the most part, I like the art. I love the colors. It's interesting how they portray Conan as a semi-dark-skinned person. Perhaps, we're in the Hyborian Age, which came long before the known history of humanity. So the peoples and everything were a little bit different than they are now. But it almost feels like he might be someone who comes from, what is now India and Pakistan and thereabouts. But I don't know if that's the intention of the artist here. And in some of the Marvel comics, they used to kind of, with the skin tone they gave Conan, it kind of felt like he was similar to a Native American or something, with just a slight reddish tinge to his skin. Anyway, the story's very familiar to me. I've read the prose version. I've read the Marvel Comics version. I probably read a Dark Horse version of this story at one point. It's one of the original Robert E. Howard stories. And there's been so much good art in the Conan world, especially in the early Marvel days and over at Dark Horse, that although this art is good, it doesn't wow me with its storytelling or its portrayal of Conan. It's decent, but doesn't rise above, I guess, because I'm so jaded. And then, interesting thing, so I'm rereading they have the original story in the back, or the first part of it. Interesting, I guess, because that's completely out of copyright, I suppose. I still don't understand the legal situation with Conan, because they call him just the Cimmerian on the cover, but inside they call him Conan. And they mention Robert E. Howard and everything there. So I'm just still surprised they can publish this in the United States this way. The claim Robert E. Howard's Conan character uncensored is a bit ridiculous. There's nothing in here that hasn't been in other adaptations of it. But so it's fun enough. I'll probably, it depends on the week, I guess. It's not on my pull list. I'll probably pick this up if I get the opportunity and not too many comics to read. So that was number 6. That was number 7. This is number 6, Geiger, from Jeff Johns and Gary Frank and Brad Anderson, the colorist. And it's another post-apocalyptic story. People are saying it's a superhero story. I can't tell yet if it is. I mean, the main character has some kind of apocalypse nuclear power. And he seems to be very long-lived and not aging. Although he doesn't look at all like he did before the nuclear explosion that took him away. There's the nuclear explosion. The reason this is kind of middling on my list, it's got great art, but the story just feels very familiar, maybe a little bit like the origin of the Hulk or Dr. Manhattan, combined with tons of familiar scenarios from apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic fiction. It is a beautiful package, really nice cover stock, really nice paper on the inside, great coloring by Brad Anderson. Although, again, I'm kind of spoiled by colorists now, and it's a very solid coloring, but without anything surprising or unusual. I guess that's what you'd want with Gary Frank art. And Gary Frank has clearly put, huge amounts of effort in it. It feels like so far, at least with this first issue, the person putting minimal effort in is Jeff Johns, the writer. We just spool out a little bit of plot. So if there's something that makes this comic special and will grab me, it'll be coming in issue 2 or 3, I guess. And I will probably pick up issue 2 or 3. And if it still doesn't grab me after that point, I'll probably let it go. I don't know if these checks up here are somehow in some way to the go-go checks of DC in the late 1960s. I know they also did a variant cover that looked like a Marvel cover, so I don't, or maybe these checks have some other kind of significance. I think they, do they give us a teaser of next issue's cover? Yes, there it is, and it has go-go checks on it too. So it's a really good deal, except that there's not much story here, but it's like 30 pages of art and writing, and then plus this cute little map of the kingdoms of future Las Vegas. So yeah, it's a fun read. It's a fun read. Engine Word is this comic that I've had a mixed relationship with ever since it started. I love science fiction, and this has a lot of kind of cooler, kind of slightly deeper science fiction elements for me to play with, but there's always in some issues, some clumsiness. So this is at number 5, but basically I really liked it a lot, and the art was really, I don't know if the art's gotten better and the coloring, or if I've somehow learned to appreciate what the colorist and artists are doing here. I think it's gotten better. And there's always, or usually, some cool page where they do something experimental in each issue. And the one thing is, like in some of the other issues, there are these narrative captions that talk in generalities. I think about the colonists or the life of humans on this planet. And they have quotation marks around them, and they just sort of float around the story and actually distract from the reading. So now I don't read them, and I come back later and read them, and I just read them separately from the story, and they neither add to the story nor really add to my appreciation of what's going on in this comic book. They're just too abstract. I'll just read you one as an example. Is it in the way we see ourselves reflected in the characters, able to walk a mile in their shoes, to feel as they do? That sounds kind of postmodern, as if he's critiquing the actual story. Anyway, so I don't know what's going on with those floating captions that aren't connected to the story. And this one is what? It's coming close to its, not too close, wait, it's issue 9. So I think there's still 3 more to go. Anyway, it's become enjoyably, not super complex, but enough plot complexities and science fiction complexities to keep me pretty amused. And then Inkblot is kind of like a half-successful, half-failed series in a way, but I feel strong affection for it anyway. I think the creators who are doing their first comic are still kind of feeling their way around. But they've got this great cat character that can travel, that's made up of a blot of ink originally, and can travel between dimensions and cause other magic things to happen. And so Inkblot is a string of stories with the cat Inkblot appearing in them, and some other information about what's going on, but it isn't perfectly connected. You can see the art is fun, the colors are fun. So I just have a I kind of view this as writers and artists of very high talent, sort of learning as they go, but in a way that keeps me amused and interested, and just remain affectionate towards this comic. In at number 3, almost always high in my rankings, is the Immortal Hulk. I think it's not reaching up towards number 1 for me anymore, just because the story has slowed down so much. It's enjoyable, but it's kind of like maybe I'm taking it for granted in a sense. Basically, I take it for granted now. There's going to be some weird body stuff. There's going to be some weird stuff about death and mutation, and the plot itself is going to progress along a little bit in each issue, and I definitely enjoy that. It's wonderful art and colors still. So not a lot more to say about that. More exciting, although really kind of conventional in a way, is the comic Silver Coin. And it's an anthology comic, sort of. Every issue is going to be drawn by this artist, Michael Walsh, and he has teamed up with a different writer each issue, and the Silver Coin will lead us into a different, I presume, horror story every issue. So in this first issue, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone story with the coin as the MacGuffin that makes the rock band become really good, but then that leads to tragic results. So the horror kind of comes at the end. The art is fun. I wouldn't say that I'm the biggest Michael Walsh fan in the world, but I like his storytelling and color and mood. It works well for this type of story, which was written by Chip Zdarsky, and so he's got a lot of sort of top-notch writers that he's teamed up with. Let's see, the next issue is going to be written by Kelly Thompson. So it's a fun series. It's not, in some senses it's an anthology series like Ha Ha or Ice Cream Man, but at least judging from this first issue, it's a little more conventional, let's say. But I'm definitely looking forward to the next issue. It's on my pull list, and I'll definitely keep it on there. Finally, my number 1 pleasure of the week, pretty much just for the art, was Space Rider's, what's it called? The Vortex of Darkness. Vortex of Darkness. Didn't position my mic very well here for this, but you can see that every page is like cool blacklight poster art, as it always has been from Alexis Zurett, and his Space Riders comic, which has a different writer on it now than before. I'd say the only difference really between earlier story arcs and this one is more like typical comic book stuff, in a sense that the entire universe is threatened with destruction from some total evil badass person from another dimension. Whereas I think the earlier arcs focused more on smaller stories where it was just 1 or 2 sets of spaceships and people trying to get revenge and that kind of thing. But anyway, love it for the art. The color is really great. Zurett does his own coloring, and he uses coloring in a minimal way that just really kicks, really works. He really knows what he's doing with his primitive yet not primitive artwork and color. So I assume there's just one more issue of this. I hope there'll be more Space Rider arcs afterward, but I suppose the thing I hope for most is that Space Riders will appear in its own giant-sized hardbacks. The bigger, the better. Hopefully with really good binding, too. If you want, you can see more of my comic chat on, I think it was on Comic Crack's channel this week. I'll put the link down below. On Sunday, we talked about a lot of the stuff we've been reading lately, me, Rasa, and Terrence of Comic Crack. So that's a way to find out more, if you care, about things I was reading other than, I mentioned a few of these ones in this countdown, but the older comics that I read this week is mostly what I discussed there. So thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll be back soon.